All right, welcome all explorers. You're now watching Learn Around the World's Read Around the World. Let's do it. All right, welcome all explorers from around the world. You are now watching our live stream out over the Casco Bay in Portland, Maine, where our studios are located. Maine is the most northeastern state in the United States, and we'd like to acknowledge before we get started here on the program that we are coming to you live today from ancestral land of the Wabanaki Confederacy, and that includes peoples still today in Maine, such as the Penobscot, Passamaquoddy, and Micmac, just to name a few. My name is Brandon. I'm going to be the facilitator on today's program, so I'm not the star of the show, but I am here to have a discussion with our guest author that is going to be joining us today, that is going to be doing a reading of a section of one of her books, one of her mini books, that we can ask questions about today. And she is also a very traveled individual that has spent years working overseas, and we can ask her all about her past career as well as her current career as an author and publisher and so many other things. I would like to welcome onto the program Miss Julie Connor. Feel free to let us know where you are joining us live today from and a little bit more about yourself. Welcome to the program.
Hi, everyone. My name is Julie Connor, and I live in Houston, Texas now. I moved to Texas after I finished my career as a diplomat. And as a diplomat, I lived overseas in 7 different countries for 9 different times. So as Brandon was saying, I have a lot of overseas experience in a lot of different countries. And I'll be glad to answer your questions and share more of my history.
That's amazing. And I guess before we do get started in, because I know some of our younger students might not know this, but I guess it may, in a short version, can you tell us what is a diplomat exactly?
A diplomat is someone sent by our government, the United States government, to represent the United States overseas in another country. So, for example, if I went to, as I did, to Colombia, the country of Colombia, then I am living in Colombia and representing the United States to the government of Colombia. And part of our job is to help Americans who might have problems when they're traveling. So let's say you and your family take a trip to Colombia and something happens and you need help. Then you can come to the U.S. Embassy and the diplomats there will help you.
Oh, wow. That sounds like a fascinating career, and I'm sure we can have a whole program just on your experience as a diplomat overseas. And so with the format of today's program, we want to go ahead and invite all of you that are watching today live to send in your questions. You can do that if you're in the Zoom webinar, right in the Zoom chat throughout today's program. Also, if you are watching from one of our many live streams somewhere else, you can either comment directly there in the post or use the hashtag #ReadAroundTheWorld over on Twitter, and we can see your live questions there as well. We're going to jump right into the reading of your book. Are you ready?
I'm ready.
Awesome. So first of all, can you, I guess, introduce your book? You're going to read a selection from the book, and if you'll go ahead and introduce the book to us and the title, and then you can just jump in and I'll throw up the visuals as you read your selection that you've chosen for us today.
Okay, so this is the second book I wrote, and it's a book for children, and it's called The Baby with 3 Families, 2 Countries, and 1 Promise. And it's about international adoption. So I hope you all know what adoption is, but if you don't, we're going to learn about that in this book.
Oh, that's fantastic. And I guess before we get started, I do have one question for you. Is there, what made you want to write a book about adoption?
Well, I adopted my son many years ago, And at the time I adopted him many years ago, there wasn't an appropriate book to read about him. So I wrote a little book for him and I read it to him until he got old enough that he could read on his own. So then there was no book available, so I just put the book I'd written away. And just recently I checked, and there's still no book like the one I've written for children. So I decided to revise my book and make it available for other children and their parents to read.
Well, how wonderful. Well, let's go ahead and get started. I know everyone's excited to learn a little bit more about the story itself.
Okay, so once upon a time, a young man named Jeff and a young woman named Jeanette fell in love and got married. They were very happy, but very poor, since they were in school. They decided to wait a while before having children. After a few years, Jeff and Jeanette finished school and got jobs. Now they were ready to have a baby. But no baby came. They waited and waited, but no baby came. After a long time, their wishes were granted, and they were going to have a baby. They were so happy. They began to think about a name for the baby and about clothes and toys for the baby. But then Jeanette got sick, and the baby did not come after all. Jeff and Jeanette cried together. They were so sad. They were not sure they wanted to try again to have a baby. After a while, Jeanette got better, and they began to wish for a baby again. Soon they learned that they were going to have a baby. Jeff and Jeanette were happy, but afraid that the baby might not come, like the first time. They did not want to be so sad a second time. But Jeanette got sick again, and again the baby did not come. Meanwhile, a young girl named Luz, which means light in Spanish, found out she was going to have a baby. Luz lived in a country far, far away from America. Luz was very afraid because she was poor and had no job. She had no family to help her with the baby. She did not know how she could get food or clothes for the baby or where they could live. Luz thought and thought, what should I do? How can I take care of this baby that is coming? I love my baby, but I have no money or family, and I cannot take care of him. What should I do? In America, Jeff and Jeanette were very, very sad because their doctor told them they were not going to have a baby unless they found one who needed a family, a baby they could adopt to be their child. In her country, Luz was also sad and worried. She thought and finally decided that the best thing for her baby was to give him to parents who wanted a baby but could not have one. She wanted her child to be loved and to have enough food and clothes and to go to school. So that's the first part of the book, telling you about the parents who want a baby but can't have one, and the mom who's having a baby but can't afford the baby, doesn't have any money or any place to live. And so putting these two together, the parents who want to adopt and the mother who needs to have her baby adopted, is what this book is about. And so adopt means that a biological mother and father pass their child to an adoptive mother and father.
Oh, that was amazing. I'm really interested to go read the rest of the book myself now. And I think this is a very important topic. You know, often, you know, and you'll probably know more about this than I, as far as because you did the research about what books were out there. And I would imagine, much of the discussion around adoption happens around adopting children that may be in the same country than you are. And what I think is really fascinating about your book is it addresses adoption, international adoption, which I can only imagine, and you've been through this, that has its own unique set of circumstances with it.
That's right. There are many, many children here in the United States who need to be adopted or looking for a forever home, who need a family. So there are many people here in the United States who adopt a U.S. child. And that's true for every country. Every country, there are many parents who will adopt a child from their own country. But sometimes there are certain issues or restrictions or just waiting periods, which makes it very difficult for you to adopt in your own country. And so parents will adopt from a different country. And as I said, there are many, many reasons that you decide to adopt from a foreign country. For example, one that I can think of is that sometimes, like right now, there are countries which are in real difficulty. And so there's a lot of abandoned children, whether it's because the parents have died because of COVID, or maybe there's war in their country. So sometimes a parent will want to help by adopting a child in one of those situations because they know how extreme their situation is with no food and no hope for the future. But either way, an adoption is an important thing for the child.
I couldn't agree more there. And so we definitely want to invite any of our participating classrooms that are watching over on Zoom. We would love to know where you're watching from. So let us know, please, where your classroom is located, or home if you're homeschoolers. And definitely, if you have questions, and it's okay if you're shy, don't worry. I have plenty of questions as well. And also, because Ms. Connor has so much travel experience, she's been to many different countries, we can also pick her brain about traveling and working overseas as well, because she has a wealth of experience doing all of that. So as we've been inviting authors onto our program, I have many questions as I've been learning from authors, and that's why I love doing this. Obviously, your son inspired you for this book, but you've also written many other books. Where do you get your inspiration as an author, or where do you get ideas for new books? Because I know you have a big, diverse group of books that you've written.
Ideas just come to me. Mainly, I write books that are based on my own experience, and so that's called nonfiction. That is, it's true what I'm writing about. So I wrote a book, for example, about traveling in Spain. That's all true. It's nonfiction. But I also write books that are fiction. Now this book, it's based on my own experience, but my name isn't Jeanette, and my husband's name isn't Jeff, and so forth. So this is fictionalized. It's changed to make it more general so that for any parent with an adoptive child, they can talk to their child about what adoption is like. And in this case, the idea came to me because I realized that as I had needed a book like this many, many years ago, there was still no book like it available for children. And I would also say that many, many books on adoption are for the parents. They tell parents what adoption is about and how they adopt and some of the issues related to adoption, but they're not for the children. And I wanted a book that was for the children, really. And so this is for you. I made this book for you. And it's based on what happened, but it's fiction.
Wow, that's really cool. So, what I take from that is, look, if any of you are aspiring writers, and I would expand that to artists of any type, look to your own personal life and your experiences for inspiration. And I think that's been a common theme with many of our authors that we've had on the show. Just yesterday, Mr. Landrum wrote his book for his granddaughter, where you were doing it for your son, which is really amazing. So Mrs. Moore's classroom is chiming in, and they're saying, hi, Julie. And when you adopted your child, what country is he from?
He was born in the country of Colombia in South America.
And is adoption hard to do, they ask?
Yes, it is hard to do because usually governments want to be very careful that the adoptive parents are going to be good parents. So here in the United States, the adoption process can be very long, like we're talking about years, and the same overseas. But frankly, usually overseas adoptions can be done more rapidly. But the rules and the time depend on the country and depend on the country's rules and laws. For example, at one time it was pretty quick and pretty easy to adopt a child from China, particularly a girl child. But now it's not so easy. It takes longer and they're more careful. So every country is different in their rules. Some countries are really protective of their children and prefer them to remain in their home country, so they don't like international adoption very much. Other countries are very eager for you to adopt their children because they believe they will have a good life in the United States.
So each country is going to be different with that process, which makes a lot of sense. And so, with adoption in particular, and especially international adoption, I can imagine, adoption has many layers to it to begin with, but especially when the parents and the child can have very different identities and cultural backgrounds from where they were born. And was that a big thing for you to introduce your son to, or did you ever visit Colombia together?
Yes, yes. The answer is to most of those questions is yes. But actually, I adopted my son when he was a baby. So the cultural issue wasn't so difficult. He grew up speaking both Spanish and English. And I told him from the time he was a baby that when he was old enough, we would return to Colombia so he could learn about his country. And that's the one promise in the title of my book. So this baby has 3 families, 2 countries, and 1 promise. And the promise is to take him back to the country of his birth. And we did that. When he was in junior high, we went to Colombia for me to work in the embassy there, the US Embassy. And so he got to spend 2 years in Colombia and see what it was like and experience his home culture and become friends with many Colombian children. So he had his promise fulfilled. And many, many parents of internationally adopted children make a special effort to bring up their child knowing about their culture and give them the opportunity to return to their country when they become older.
Oh, wow. Thank you for sharing. And I can imagine that what must have been a fantastic experience for your family to do together. And so when you mentioned with Spanish, are you fluent in Spanish? And did you speak Spanish at home with your son?
I am fluent in Spanish, and I didn't speak Spanish with my son, but while I was working in Spanish-speaking countries, I would have Spanish household help, and I would also have Spanish-speaking friends. And so my son was surrounded by Spanish all the time. And I lived in many Spanish-speaking countries. So he had lots of opportunity to be immersed in the Spanish language. And he is actually quite fluent in Spanish. And he teases me that his accent in Spanish is better than mine. And it's true, it is. because he learned Spanish as a baby and I learned Spanish as an adult. So his Spanish accent is better, but I tell him that my vocabulary, the number of Spanish words I know and use, is better than his, but he is totally fluent.
That's so amazing you bring it up. I often joke about my own self. I try to pronunciate as much as possible, but my southern drawl does come out from time to time, and especially I can hear it in other languages when I'm speaking, and I'm really drawing out consonants and vowels, and it's kind of embarrassing that I can notice it more in another language than in English, which is interesting that you bring that up.
Well,
And
one thing about that, if I can say, is that we think of Spanish as being one language, but in fact, Spanish varies the way it's spoken. So the Spanish spoken in parts of Spain is very different from the Spanish spoken in Latin America. And in particular, in Argentina, for example, everyone speaks Spanish with an Italian inflection because there have been so many Italian immigrants into Argentina. But each country has its own particular words that it will use that are not necessarily the words you'll find in Spain. So every time you go to a new country, even though you speak Spanish, you have to learn special things that they say and do there.
that's a really important point that you bring up there. And by the way, whoever's if you're watching with us, let us know. Do you speak another language? I love talking about and learning about this. And to kind of emphasize your point there, when I first was learning Spanish, was doing a homestay in Nicaragua, and moving from Nicaragua just a couple countries over to Panama. They spoke so quickly in Panama and Nicaragua. I kind of relate to the southern slower drawl in English in the United States. And they had a very drawn out version or dialect in their use of Spanish, versus Panama was so quick and really difficult for me to catch up with my translation in my head. So yeah, it's a fantastic note to bring up about language learning. I love it. So with your travel experience, I know you shared some photos with us, and again, I recommend all our students out there take this advantage while we have access to someone like Mrs. Connor here that has so much experience, and let us know your live questions. If not, definitely, I'm sure she would not be opposed to, if you come up with questions later, feel free to email me, have your teachers and parents, and maybe we can find out those answers later on as well. But would you like to talk about some of the photos that you shared with me?
Yes, before we do that, let me just say that I only read a part of my book, because I think it brings the most important characters, that is the parents who want to adopt and the mother who wants to give her child up for adoption. The rest of the book continues with the other people involved in an international adoption. So the foster parents who temporarily take care of the child until the adoption can be arranged. So that is the three families that the title talks about: the biological mother, the adoptive family, and the foster family. And then once the adoption, biological mother and adoptive mother and father are joined, or they meet each other, then there's a whole process that still has to be done. And it takes quite a while. Now, my book doesn't talk about all the different steps, but it does talk about having to go to the U.S. Embassy to get a passport and a visa, or a visa for your child, to take them into the United States. So you can't just travel overseas without your passport and your visa. And I also then take the family back to the United States, where the new baby has to be introduced to the family of the adoptive parents, to the grandparents, to the friends, and even to their dog. So when I adopted my son, a lot of people told me that my dog was going to be jealous of the baby. So we were a bit concerned about that. We worried. But in fact, our dog loved the baby, and she used to lick him all over like he was her puppy. And you would have to stop her from licking him. Anyway, so the book continues on about the process until the baby is happily with his adoptive family in the United States. Now, on my photos, I only picked some photos from my most recent trips. So I've been traveling for a very long time, but I got some photos, and I hope as we look at them, you might be able to recognize some of the places and some of the animals in the photographs. So let's see if you can do that.
Great. And before, I did want to just touch on one thing that you just mentioned, and because I'm curious now. And you talked about visas and passports. And for all of our, especially our younger students out there that aren't aware of these things, these are your travel documents, your national travel documents that you need to visit another country. So your passport is given to you by your own national government, and then you need a visa or permission by the country that you're visiting. And depending on where you come from, that process could look very different. And so that's a whole big topic that we could get into. And I'm just curious, has your son shown any interest? And if so, what's the process with citizenship for Colombia? Is he interested of having citizenship in Colombia? And if so, is that something that is allowed?
Yes, my son is entitled to two passports, a U.S. passport because he is what's called a naturalized U.S. citizen. That is, his adoption was approved and his citizenship was approved for the United States. But because he was born in Colombia, he's also entitled to a Colombian passport. And when he was younger, he sometimes said he was going to live in Colombia when he grew up because he loved Colombia when he was living there. But now that he's an adult, and my son is an adult now, he's living here in the United States. And in fact, he has just joined the Army. So he has chosen to be a soldier for the United States.
Oh, great. All right. So thank you for answering that question. It's passports and visas are a thing you have to think about when you travel, and certainly has become a topic of my personal interest. So I'm going to share your photos. I tried to keep them together by country, and I believe we're starting off with Indonesia. Let me.
That's correct.
I'll pause that. Let me just go back here.
Okay, so where are we starting? This is an orchestra. Now, if you've ever seen the orchestra or been to an orchestra or you have an orchestra in your school, this orchestra looks very different from your orchestra, doesn't it? You can see the players are sitting on the ground. They have these instruments. The whole orchestra is called a gamelan orchestra, and they play these, as you can see, metal objects, and they play something that looks long and thin metal also. And the woman up in the top left, the two women, they're singers. So the sound of this orchestra is very, very, very different from US music, from United States music. And at first it can sound really bizarre, but once you get used to it, it's amazing. It's amazing that this kind of music is so different from our own, and yet so beautiful in its own way. So an orchestra like this will always accompany a theater performance, and for the Indonesian, a theater performance of this traditional kind will be a shadow puppet show. So the puppets and the puppeteers will be up front on a screen, and then the orchestra like this will be sitting in front and playing the music to emphasize whether it's a battle scene or a love scene or whatever it is. So it's just amazing to watch a performance of the gamelan orchestra. And the clothes they're wearing are traditional Indonesian clothes, which is called batik. and they're all hand-dyed clothes. So again, they don't look like the clothes we wear, but in their own culture, they are beautiful. I don't know if anyone has any questions about the gamelan orchestra. I'll just say it, for us, it sounds very metallic, very tinny, more like maybe a brass band, but not like that. But that's just to give you the idea.
And if
And the
any,
women's,
yep, I was just going to say, if any of our students have been on our Nippy virtual field trip in Bali, they've heard this before. And if not, make sure you don't miss those when we run them, typically in the springtime.
it's an experience, and it's so different from Western culture, which includes American culture. It's like, wow, I'd really like to hear that in person. When I first saw that experience of the gamelan, I said, I want to experience that. So this is me. It's very, very hot in Indonesia, so I'm wearing the baggiest clothes I could wear to try to keep cool. And this is the zoo in Bali, and it's very hands-on. You can see they let me hold this great big snake. And snakes in Indonesia can get to be huge, and they have pythons. And pythons grow so big they can actually eat a person. So that one is not big enough to eat me, but they do get snakes big enough to eat people. And unfortunately, you will read in the newspaper in Indonesia from time to time about a person disappearing, and then they find out the person was eaten by a snake.
And speaking of something else that can eat people.
Yes, this is the largest lizard in the world. He's so big, they call him a dragon. So this is the Komodo dragon, which is unique to Indonesia. And there's several islands where you can find these Komodo dragons. Now, they are very dangerous, and they can easily kill a person, even if they just bite you. Their bite will be filled with so many germs and bacteria that you can easily die from the bite. So you see me standing there, and beside me is an Indonesian man holding it's like a fork. And he uses that. If one of the Komodos would charge me, then he would use that to push the Komodo back. Now, frankly, I was scared because it doesn't look like much protection if one of those Komodos decides to attack me. But the thing about Komodos is they will eat a big meal, and then they won't be hungry again for a long time. So as long as you're watching them after they've eaten, they usually are just wanting to take a nap, have a rest, and digest their food. And you can see, I think, how big they are. So another unique animal in Indonesia is the orangutan. I don't know if you've ever seen an orangutan. They're orange, so they're very distinctive because they're orange. And they're kind of sort of like if you've ever seen a gorilla. They're kind of like that, but very different also because they're orange and they have a really big body and then long arms and long legs because they use their arms and their legs to climb. And they live in the tops of trees. And so with this big jungle, they will go up to the top of the trees and live very solitary lives. They don't live in troops or herds or anything like that. They like to live alone, quietly, in the top of their trees. But the name orangutan is Malaysian, it comes from the Malaysian language, and orang means people, and utan means forest. So they are the people of the forest. So when I went out to visit them, and you have to go quite a distance out from the capital city to be able to see these orangutans, they live in the trees, and when there's a lot of fruit in the trees, they don't come down. But when there's not too much fruit in the trees, they will come down. So the Indonesian National Park that I visited, they will put food on these, they call them feeding platforms, so that the orangutans will come down so that those of us who want to visit the orangutans can look at them more closely. And they'll come and their food is bananas and things like that. They just gobble it up and then they go right back up to the top of their trees. So they're not interested in socializing. And in fact, a lot of the pictures I took, they're sitting there with their back to the people looking at them. They don't want to look at the people. They turn their back to them. So but I'd been wanting for years to go see orangutans in their forests.
And
So,
they are also, well, I guess Borneo is part Indonesia, part Malaysia. Is that correct? But they are only found in Borneo and Sumatra, correct?
no, there are several islands that they live on, but they're in the mostly, yes, on Borneo, and from as you're looking at it, the left-hand side, which is called Kalimantan in Indonesia, and then the right-hand side is Papua New Guinea, and it's its own country actually. So, and then the main part of what you see, what Brandon was talking about. The whole island there used to be called Borneo, but now it's called Papua New Guinea on one side, which is a different country, and then Kalimantan on the Indonesian side. But Indonesia, if you look at the map, it's all those islands. So it's called an archipelago, which means a series of islands.
Which is, I believe, if I remember off, my notes aren't in front of me about Indonesia right here. It's about 17,000 islands that make up the country of Indonesia. It's a lot. Most of them are really small, but obviously some of them are very large as well.
Which also means that there are like thousands of languages the people speak in Indonesia. And when they created their country, which was not that long ago, they're less than 100 years old as a country, they got together, representatives from all the different islands, and they had to decide what was going to be their national language. And they chose what's called Bahasa Indonesia, which means it's really not the language of any of the islands. It's the language which the traders used to trade among the different islands. So they chose a unique language to be their national language. So I thought this was very interesting. It's a fossilized waterfall. I don't know if you can see that, but you've probably studied in caves. You have stalactites and stalagmites. Well, this is something like that, except it's a waterfall that no longer runs, but the mineral deposits make it look like it's sort of still running. So I thought that was very beautiful and very interesting.
Yeah, it's amazing. We have a program with this one too. Yerve el Agua. Is this in Oaxaca?
Yes.
Yes.
In Mexico.
And we have another place in Mexico, I think, or another topic. What are these?
These are something, the man is holding two examples of what they called alejibre, which is essentially imaginary animals. So the artists in that part of Mexico, which is northern Mexico, a state called Oaxaca, they make these imaginary animals and they are gorgeous and beautiful. So when I was there, I had the opportunity to buy some of these figures, these alejibres, and I also got this book on folk art in Mexico. And the gentleman I'm standing by, he's actually the artist that made these alejibres. Now they sort of look like cats, but they're not real. I mean, they're not, you can see their faces are more like moons. So they're examples. And there was a movie that came out not too long ago about this part of Mexico. You might have seen it, a movie called Coco. So that's all about this magical part of Mexico.
Yeah, when he goes to the afterworld, he sees the alejibres there in Coco, which is really really cool. Awesome. And Utah Beach, I've heard of this. Where's this located?
This is in France. It's in the south of France on the Atlantic Ocean. And for those of you who might have heard your grandparents or your parents talking about World War II, this is where the United States and its allies, many allies, invaded France because the Germans were occupying France. So this was one of the famous beaches where the Americans and others had to come ashore in the face of the German cannons and guns and everything shooting at them. So it was amazing that they had such courage to do this. So Brandon is pulling up the map where all of this happened. So my father was in this force, and all of them were previously over in England, which is up on the top part of that. And they had to cross that English Channel and then land on the beaches in France, which were occupied by the German army. So when I took my son and my nephew to France, they said one of their favorite days of the whole trip was the day we went to the sites where all the soldiers, the American soldiers and English soldiers and Canadian soldiers and all of the other allied countries came ashore in France. So our day, the area is called Normandy in France, when they came ashore on those beaches in Normandy. And to learn that history is very, very interesting.
Awesome. Julie, one of our classrooms in Anderson Elementary in Houston, they would like to know, and I get this question a lot myself. It's hard for me to answer as a Libra, but we'll see how you do. What is your favorite country from all of your travels?
Well, hello, Anderson Elementary from Houston, and I'd be so happy to come talk to y'all sometime. And by the way, I didn't say hello to Moore Elementary, and I want to do that too. A lot of people ask me that question, and I'm going to tell you that I have loved all the countries I've lived in. And that's why I travel so much, because I think every country has something to offer. So I can't say which country I love the most, but I can say which country had something special that I liked. For example, Mexico, we just looked. I love Mexico because of its folk art, which is called artesanía. It is so unique with its folk art and its cultures and tradition that I just love visiting Mexico to see all of the handicrafts. Or take another country I've visited and lived in, Guatemala. Now, Guatemala, physically, as far as its looks, it's the most beautiful country I've ever been in. And believe me, I think the United States is fabulous as far as, for example, our national parks in the West, the Grand Tetons and the Grand Canyon. Those are all fabulous. But I've seen things in Guatemala that I've never seen in the United States as far as beauty. For example, a volcano reflected in a lake. So you see the volcano in reality, and you also see the volcano as it looks in the lake, and it's just amazingly beautiful. Guatemala also has something that I don't think we have in the United States, which is beaches with black sand. So as far as physical beauty, I love Guatemala. It's just so gorgeous. Perhaps I think the most gorgeous country I've seen outside of the United States. So every country offered me something special. And I love all of these countries for what they offered me. And that's why I keep traveling.
Great. Thank you for answering that question. Awesome. And I think you have a couple more photos, and then we're going to need to wrap things up here. I know classrooms have their schedules. I know you're very busy, and we have another program coming up here shortly as well. I noticed something in the background there. I think you're still in France, correct?
That's right. Can any of you recognize what that structure in the background of the photo is, and guess where we are in this picture? Well, it's Paris, and we know that, Paris, France, because the structure in the back is the world-famous Eiffel Tower, built by Gustave Eiffel. It's the tallest structure in Paris, and anyone who sees that structure immediately knows you're looking at Paris, France.
Awesome. And fun fact about all of you U.S. students, the Washington Monument held the world record for the tallest structure until the Eiffel Tower was built and took the record. Neither one of them are the tallest today, however.
No, actually, I haven't checked recently, but the tallest structure, let's say 20 years ago, was a tower in Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia, where I lived for a while. So people keep trying to build something taller and taller and taller. So this picture is in a very famous place, also in France, called Versailles. It was the palace of the kings and queens of France. And this woman in the background is one of the queens of France, a very famous queen of France. So if you can see how they used to wear their hair, the women back then, and the dresses, it's so opulent and ornate. And I compare that to me in a headscarf and blue jeans. This one is by one of my favorite painters in the world. His name is Diego Velasquez. He was the painter of the King of Spain, who also at that time was the most powerful ruler in all of Europe. He was the emperor of the Habsburg Empire, and he ruled much of Europe. And this was his daughter, so she's the princess. And in Spanish, the name for princess is Infanta. So she was the Infanta Maria Teresa, and she grew up to be a queen. But this is her as a little girl. And again, you can see how elaborate her hair is fixed, and her beautiful gown. And she would be dressed this way every day of her life. So she grew up to be a queen. Okay, we're switching countries now. This is in Spain, up in the north of Spain. And so we were lucky enough to be there on a day they were having a fair. So the local people were wearing traditional costumes and carrying their flags, their traditional flags, and so forth. So we felt very lucky to be able to experience a bit of their local culture. And do you see the man? He's not wearing trousers like men wear today. He's wearing pantaloons, which only go to the knee. So here Brandon's put up Spain, and we were up in the north part of Spain. So this is the same fair, and you see you have some other traditional types. This is a friar, a wandering, he's not a priest, he's a friar. He's got the bells on, so you would hear him coming, and he would be begging for his food. And then a soldier, and then it could be the man on the right is probably also a townsman. So these are some of the traditional clothes they would have been wearing, let's say, in the 1500s, for example. And you see it's a Christian country because he's carrying the cross. So I thought you all might like to see this one. Can you guess what this is telling the story of? It's a material called a tapestry. It's all cloth. And it's amazing. There's a very famous tapestry in England called the Bayeux Tapestry. But this is a modern tapestry. And it was sewn, and it's tremendous. It's huge. It's long. It tells the story of Game of Thrones. So it's in Ireland, and it's amazing. Much of Game of Thrones was filmed in Ireland. So they decided they wanted to memorialize that by making this huge, big tapestry to tell that story. Maybe some of you got to see Game of Thrones on TV. It kind of scares me with all the dragons and the fighting and everything, and the giants and the elves and all the things there are, but it's a wonderful story.
It is. Awesome. Well, thank you so much. I know you've generously donated a lot of your time today, and I know you're very busy with all your projects going on, and then as well with our classrooms. I know you could have done many other things today, but you've chosen to come here and learn a little bit and read around the world. One of my favorite things that I've been loving to do with these programs is learning from our authors that we're bringing on, and I love to travel nowadays, but I very first started thinking and dreaming about traveling around the world via books, by reading. So definitely go to your local library, check out things. And we're actually going to donate a copy of the book so you can read the full story, see all the wonderful illustrations throughout the book as well. And that's going to go to our classroom in Houston, to Mrs. Moore's classroom. So that's going to be exciting. We're going to send you a copy of our book that we read today, with 3 families, 2 countries, and 1 promise. Yes, go ahead.
I would like to just repeat what Brandon said, that most people start writing, and the advice that you get usually is to write what you know, just what he said, write what you know. Other people might not know what you know, and they'll be interested in hearing about what you know and your experiences. And I'd also like to say, like Brandon, I really want to encourage you to try to travel. It really helps you to understand what's happening in the world when you see different viewpoints and different cultures. And lastly, I want to tell you all happy holidays. You see, I dressed for the holidays today, and I hope you all have a wonderful holiday season.
All right. Well, thank you so much for sharing your time and knowledge and wisdom with us today, and being an inspiration. I know I'm inspired by your story, and I know all the students out there. If you've never considered, you never thought it was a possibility, there are careers, whole jobs you can do in other countries, from short amounts of time to very long periods of amount of time. So get out there, see the world, and until we can do it physically, safely, when we want to all the time, virtually, and buy books. So go to your local library and continue to read around the world. Until next time, explorers, keep exploring.